Story I'll Tell, Episode 4. My name is Raquel and I'm with House of Healing in Dallas. I'm the women's leader and I'll be sharing my testimony from brokenness to deliverance. My favorite Bible verse is the book of Psalms 34, verse 17 and verse 18. The Lord hears his people when they call to him for help. He rescues them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed. I've used that scripture. I've held on to that scripture in a lot of different times, in a lot of different seasons of my life. It reminds me that regardless of what I go through, good or bad, the Lord's always close to me. The Lord's always with me. He'll never leave me. And he hears me when I call out to him. The hardest season of my life that I relied on God during that season was I recently went through a divorce. We were married for 15 and a half years, and he left me from one day to the next with no reason, no explanation, no conversation, no nothing, just left from one day to the next. He returned the next day to pick up his clothes, and by that time I already knew, well, he can't come back because, I don't know where he had stayed. It really shook my faith because as the women's leader in the church, I encourage women. I pray for them. I pray for their marriages. I pray for healing. I pray for all different kinds of things, anything that I can do to encourage and build up and pray for my sisters. And here I was being the women's leader and now going through a divorce. And I felt so ashamed. I felt like my faith was being tested because who's going to pray for me? Who's going to pray for my marriage? I mean, who was encouraging me? Who was helping me? But I was too ashamed to share with anyone else what I was going through. I remember I'd go to the church and, put on my makeup, put on my lipstick and smile and pray for my sisters. And then I'd go home to my empty house and I'd cry because I felt so broken inside. I felt like a failure. I felt disappointed. I felt like, where was God when I needed him most? Why wasn't my marriage covered? Why wasn't my marriage working out? I didn't want to feel the rejection that sometimes Christians in churches give because of a divorce. I didn't want to feel the humiliation of having to explain to people that he left, that I was going to be getting a divorce. I didn't want to feel any of that. And even though it wasn't a great marriage, especially in the beginning, there was certain abuses. Even towards the end of the 15 and a half years, it still wasn't a great marriage. He wasn't saved, but by faith, I still believe that one day he would be. And I think that God knew what I was going through. And I believe now that I can clearly see from here what was going on over there, I know that God allowed that to happen so that he could bring me out of what was a bad situation, because I would have never made that choice on my own. And not because it wasn't the right choice, it would have been, but because I didn't want to feel the rejection or the humiliation that sometimes Christians do. So I stayed. I would have continued to stay. I would have continued to endure all that. But I believe that God allowed that to happen. It was maybe about a month into the separation that I found out that he was with someone else. I filed for the divorce. A couple of months after I had filed for the divorce, that's when I found out that she's pregnant and they're having a baby, and that was the whole reason why he abruptly left. When I would go home to my big empty house and no one else was around me, I didn't have to be strong for anyone else. I didn't have to encourage anyone. I didn't have to pray for anyone. It was just me. I would get on my face and I would just cry, like when you you cry ugly, you know, like just ugly. And I would put on my worship music and I would get on my face and I would just cry ugly in my living room. During those times that God would show up and he would hold me and he would embrace me and he would let me know that I would never be alone, that he loved me, that he would never reject me, that he would never forsake me, that I was his, that I was worthy to be loved. And he embraced me and he got me through with that. There's nothing else in my life, out of all the abuses that I've been through, from a child into teenage years, into now, into my adulthood, out of everything that I've ever gone through, that I think was the hardest, because I went through that being saved. I went through that doing ministry, and I questioned, how could that happen to me? Why did that happen to me? But our ways are not God's ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. And even though I didn't understand why I had to go through that, now, where I'm at now in my life, I clearly see why God allowed that. He always has a purpose for our lives. He always has a plan for our lives. He's always working. Even though we don't see it, he's always working for our good. So I held on to him tighter than I've ever held on to anything else. When I was weak, he gave me strength. When I was hopeless, he was my hope. When I would think about backsliding, because I lived alone, there was times that I felt like drinking, and who would have known, I remember I could taste the tequila in my mouth, but I refused to give in to that. I would rebuke the enemy and I would pray and I would hold on to God, because it didn't matter what I went through. Nothing was worth me destroying my testimony. Nothing was worth me going back to where God had pulled me out of. And I knew that what the enemy meant for evil, God would turn it around and use it for good. That he would use it to bring glory to him. For whatever purpose he had for me, it'd be fulfilled, regardless of what I had to go through.